Happy Saturday and welcome to the Marketing MadMen. Nick Constantino here, and I am with Tom DiGregorio, the founder of Aquaguard, and we are going to have a really interesting conversation about marketing from somebody who's done it really well and built a hell of a brand that most people know of and pray they don't need. Is that a good way to sum it up?
That's a good one. We're kind of like the doctor. You don't want us until you really need us. But when you need a company in this industry, you definitely want to go with somebody that
and go fast.
Do it right and stand behind what they do. And do
it fast, because this is not one of those things that when the water comes through once, you're like, oh, it'll be fine. It's going to get worse. It's going to get worse and it's going to spread. And I had to get this done. And it was so unpredictable. The amount of rain that happened didn't dictate when it flooded worse. It was freak things that happened, like how saturated the ground is and which angle it was coming in from. So before we get into the marketing stuff, just elaborate a little bit. Talk about, we don't have to get super technical, talk about the hydrostatic pressure and why water comes in and why when you built a house 50 years ago, no one was thinking about this stuff.
Well, water, it can't live with it, can't live without it. And for now, basically 30 years, we have dealt with the damaging effects of water, either too much or not enough. Both have an impact on a foundation when, considering where we just came through a lot of rain.
Helene,
I think Atlanta ended up, did I hear maybe 10 to 12 inches in some areas?
10 to 12. Now, the good news for what it's worth is it hadn't rained in so long that the ground was dry. And I think relative to what I saw, and I don't want to belittle anybody else's experience, but it did absorb a lot of it, more than I thought it would.
Well, yes and no.
But I'm completely making that up because I'm not an expert.
It can vary depending on the region of the country.
Okay.
And we have this wonderful Georgia red clay, and when we have lack of rain, it dries up like a sponge.
Wow!
And it literally pulls away from the wall.
Oh, so that's leaving openings for water to come through.
So when water comes in, initially it has a free rein to go wherever it wants. Then the soil gets wet and it expands like a sponge would.
Oh my goodness.
And that's when you start getting excessive hydrostatic pressure. That's the water trying to find a way to level itself. And that pressure is so strong that it can literally push through a little crack in a foundation, in a poured wall. It can literally take a block wall. And because the lateral pressure from the outside in is so intense, a block wall will actually bend and bow.
Jesus.
In fact, in some cases, under extreme pressures, and we've seen this before, it can literally blow the basement wall or crawl space wall right into the inside.
And that can't just be overnight. Like there have to be signs that something's coming in, right?
Well, yes, it does. But this is the tricky thing about foundation repair, especially block walls, because they have a lot of strength in what we call compression, which is vertical pressure, but laterally.
Yeah, because all the weight on the house on it. So vertically, they're built to.
Right, but what a block wall is just individual blocks of
cinder
water
blocks,
in between. So when you have lateral pressure, the block will open up, and sometimes you can maybe just stick a business card in that little crack.
But water knows.
But what happens is it opens and it closes, and it opens and it closes over time with rain and lack of rain. And what happens, like a paper clip, after you bend it enough times, it weakens and breaks. So. People, when it comes to foundation repair, cracks can tell you a whole lot. When it comes to waterproofing, a lot of people say, my basement never leaked, and then all of a sudden it did. And they don't understand.
Yeah.
Because the process of water finding its way in it takes time. And it's almost like, you ever seen an ant farm behind glass with all those tunnels?
Yeah.
Well, after a while, this is what happens with water. It forces its way. It creates these little legs, and then next thing you know, X amount of years down the road, one of those little legs finds a way in or under the wall.
Which shouldn't be that surprising. Rivers and the geography of the world were made by rivers and water forcing these things, and you see tributaries that exist to this day on bigger scale. So again, it's time and it's erosion. I think we've set the stage for this, which is fantastic. So why, when we were building houses, probably most houses were built between the 50s and 70s, I would assume somewhere in that range. Were we not aware of this problem? Why didn't we build better defenses when we were making these houses in the first place?
Well, that's a great question, and quite honestly,
I mean, you probably wouldn't have the same business if we did that. So good for not. But why?
You can boil it down to the building codes. The construction codes to this day in Atlanta do not require a builder to waterproof a foundation. The code, if it's not going to be finished living space from a new construction stage, the code tells builders that all they have to do is damp proof it. That is a technical term, damp proof. And what damp proofing is a material, it's just an asphalt emulsion that's sprayed on the wall that is resistant to water. It is not impervious to water. It's like wearing a windbreaker out when it rains.
Right.
After a while, it beads up a little bit, and then the next thing you know, it's soaked through and you're wet.
Right.
That's damp proofing. Waterproofing.
I can't believe that they would even with a serious face say that. Damp proof. I don't need not damp. I need not wet.
I understand, but the reason is because builders are only on the hook for 1 year when it comes to water leakage in a foundation.
Get out of here. Oh my goodness.
When I first started,
that's borderline depressing.
When I first started Aquaguard, we were doing only new construction, and we were dealing with home builders. And I was out there spraying foundation walls, trying to convince builders to spend, instead of $400 or $500, $2,500 for a waterproofing process that would come with a warranty. The builders didn't want to do that because they'd rather take that extra $2,000 and put it into counters.
The things you see.
The sizzle. Nobody walks into a new home, walks down to the basement and says, I wonder what's on the other side of this foundation wall.
Yeah.
So ultimately, when after years went by and I couldn't convince builders to really waterproof the foundation,
residential.
I said to myself, we're going to have a repair market in this town forever. And that's when we basically let go of the new construction division, and we focused our attentions on the homeowners who really needed a quality company to come in and repair their foundation right the first time.
Yeah, unbelievable. So I'm going to tell you my horror story with waterproofing, just to bring some emphasis on this. So I lived in a townhouse when I first moved here. I moved from DC. Houses were $1 million there. I got a house for $108,000. Was thrilled. Big house. Brookhaven was nice. Water had come through from the neighbor's house through to mine. Okay. So we got everything waterproof because we couldn't imagine why it was coming from the neighbor's house. So we got the wall waterproofed. Under the stairwell, I cut the stairwell down. It was behind the electrical box. I took a Sawzall and actually went through the return line of my house. I almost died. It exploded. I was grounded because I was always taught to be grounded. With the Sawzall, went through it. It exploded. It was the loudest explosion. So finally, I get under the stairs, and there is so much black mold leading right into the air conditioner unit. The guy that lived there behind me had died from lung problems because no one told him, and they was just sucking black mold into the HVAC and out through it because of the problem. Now, that being said, we fixed everything. I did a lot of the work myself that I could. We waterproofed the inside wall. The house was up to code. It was fine. It was not easy to remediate and fix. But that's how serious of an issue it is. That is how bad, because it's not just the water. It's the mold that comes along with it. It's the spores. It's the humidity, the allergies. So I think when you say you're providing a service and you have to do residential people, I just offered to everybody, if this is something that's happening, call somebody right away. Do not waste your time. Do not think you can fix it yourself. Mother Nature is a bitch, and she's going to beat you every time.
Yeah, these are not typically DIY projects.
Yeah.
You can do little things like around your home to make sure that the gutters and downspouts are properly working and piped off away from the foundation, because that is a very big issue.
Yeah.
For 30
But visibly,
years.
You see it happening because you see the water culminate in one pot.
Right, but people don't typically think to go and look. I've been telling people for 3 decades, go outside when it's raining, as long as it's not lightning, and see what's going on with your gutters and downspouts. I've been saying this for basically 30 years now. The number one reason why basements and crawl spaces leak and foundations crack, settle, and bow is due to improperly channeled roof water. Because think about it. When it rains, thousands of gallons come off of the roof, and if the gutters aren't collecting it effectively, and then it goes down the downspout, and then a lot of people, it's just dropping water there.
Yeah.
So you have to pipe them off well away from the foundation. And another thing that happens a lot is they pipe them off, or they see that they're piped off. They see the pipe going into the ground, but they have no idea where it goes, and they don't realize that it clogs with time. So there's a false sense of confidence that says, oh, my downspouts are piped off. Well, if they use the old 4-inch corrugated pipe you get at the big box store, the roots and everything can grow right in and through that. So what happens is you think you're safe. When you go outside when it's raining, you go look at a downspout where it goes into the pipe, and you'll see water just flying out of the pipe right next to the ground, right next to the foundation.
So frustrating, because like you had said, if we were coded better and there was more responsibility on the gutter people to do a better job, then half these problems wouldn't exist.
Yeah, it's really the codes have been the big problem.
Yeah, it's crazy. All right, so now that we doom and gloomed everybody, let's talk about some fun stuff. So you've been in business. When did you found the business?
January of 1995. It'll be 30 years in just a few months.
Okay, so 30 years. So when you started business, obviously there were years you were winging it, you're figuring stuff out. You said you're spraying yourself. But when you got to the point of critical mass, what were your thoughts on marketing? What did you know you have to do for marketing?
Well, 30 years ago, if you weren't in the yellow pages, then you were never going to make it. And that because I don't know that anybody uses the yellow pages anymore, but
the people selling the yellow pages are telling you that they do.
Yeah. So,
but Google's the yellow pages, right? It's changed.
Everything's
Google.
digital now, but back in the day when they had the books, you'd buy an ad, and then the rep would come next year and say, your competition has a half page, and you want to make sure that that you're in the lead. So then they tuck you into a full page, and then a double truck they called it, which is both pages.
Yeah.
And it just got more and more and more expensive.
And everybody learned that if your company starts with an A, you'll be placed first. So everybody just started. They're starting the companies with letters and A's and numbers to try to throw you off.
There's all kinds of games you could play with the yellow pages, but so that's a kind of a dinosaur at this point. But I was not a contractor by trade. A lot of contractors in the Atlanta area or throughout the country, maybe their dad was a contractor, or their grandparents or whatever, and they're technically smart, but they aren't necessarily business smart.
Right.
So they know what they're doing, but they don't know how to grow a company. They don't know how to lead people. They don't know how to market. So
I think scale is the word, right? It's pretty easy. Most people would say it's pretty easy to run a $6-7 million company, just kind of being that guy if you're good at what you do. But that's probably where it starts.
Exactly. If you want to scale, then you got to really put some thought into building the foundation that's going to allow you to grow.
Yeah.
My goal was to build a brand, to build a name that people knew, and fortunately, that's probably my proudest accomplishment. Not everybody has these kind of problems, but when you mention the problem and your company comes up, then when they do have the problem, it's going to affect, and now it's going to affect you, and you're going to get the calls. But when you're early on in the business, to do we didn't even think about doing billboards early on, because billboards they don't necessarily bring you leads. It's awareness.
Yeah.
But so early on, when you're running a business, you want to make sure the dollars you're spending are going to get your phone to ring. Then as you start building some momentum, then you can start doing a little bit more branding. Yeah. Where not every dollar you're spending is necessarily going to be a lead you're going to get that day or that month. Yeah.
You still want to track to some extent. I talk about effectiveness versus efficiency. Mm-hmm. There's still techniques and things, but I liken it to, when you look at the yellow pages, that was really operations. Mm-hmm. Like you weren't in there to market. You were in there because that's how people found you. And I like it to SEO today, right? You could do the best job in the world. If your website is not optimized for Google, no one's going to find you. Exactly. That's not a marketing expense. That's operational these days. We've changed the lexicon of what is marketing, and we spend so much marketing dollars on SEO. You're not marketing. You're helping people find your business, right? That's like putting up a sign. If you have a nice right off I-85, you put a sign up so people see it, because that's operation. So you grow. So now we're at the point where we're doing this branding. You did a great job with billboards everywhere, TV, radio. You were doing all this stuff. What was your thought process? What were you telling to your marketing people and to the agencies? What were you expecting out of this?
Well, again, probably brand awareness. Okay. So that when people have the problem, we're going to be, in the top of their mind. Yeah. And it isn't even just, let's suppose, when somebody has a problem, one of the first things they do is they tell their neighbors or their friends.
Yeah.
Oh my God, my basement leaked.
Yeah.
Oh my God, my foundation's cracked. And then the neighbor might say, hey, I see Aquaguard all the time on TV or on the radio or billboards.
Right.
So, it's about leads.
Yeah. Known before needed is a really important thing.
When I think a lot of business owners make early on is they go for the big hit. They're spending money on television and radio that A, they can't really afford, and B, what we tracked all the time was our lead cost.
Yeah.
What is it costing every time that phone rings? And in the early stages, you have to spend money that's going to bring you leads. As you mature, then you can start doing branding. So I wanted to create that brand awareness, and fortunately, that's what we were able to do over the years. And that just has a lot of good repercussions moving forward.
I would say compounding benefits, because here's the way I look at it, right? One, you're creating barriers to entry, because now another company to come in here has to probably outspend you 3-to-1 to gain anywhere near the footing you have, which is not going to happen. Number two, you're making your other mediums more effective. So for example, on Google, when you search, even if you're paying for ads, there's still 3 ads that come up. Mm-hmm. But if they heard of you, they're going to click on you, which makes you that much more likely. So you're set up. And the way I tell people, I ask very simple, because radio's tricky, right? Hard to measure. We've gone through all these things. But if it's done the right way, it could really amplify. But what I ask is, what is your intention with your business? Are you trying to make an ROI and sell, or are you trying to give this to your children? If you're giving it to your children and you're not doing 30,000-foot brand marketing, you're never going to give this business to your kid.
Well, there's a saying which I wholeheartedly believe in, is that you should build and run your business like you're going to sell it, whether you ever do or not. It should be the same way, because if you're going to pass it on to your kids or sell it, either way, you want it to maximize the value. So you really should treat it the same way. And a lot of business owners, again, back to the contractor mentality, they're working hard. They're not really thinking about down the road. And all of a sudden, down the road comes. And then they realize they haven't really branded it properly, or they haven't structured it well enough to where it's valuable for somebody to buy them. You can be purchased, but you're going to maximize your multiple, if you will.
Right. There's a difference between buying EBITDA and buying a brand, right? If you're buying a multiplier and it's just EBITDA and you have a clean EBITDA, which is great, what's the upside? The upside is all they have to put into it. If you have a brand, the upside is already built into it.
Exactly. So that's all a big part of what I believe anybody should do, no matter how big or small the company is.
Yeah, and I think one of the things about brand marketing is what you don't want to become is a commodity. And if you're all fighting for the same leads that are already there, then your pricing is the only sensitivity, right? Realistically, the way you guys do it, yes, did you invest in R&D? Did you do things differently? Yes, but the services are similar that people offer. So how do you differentiate yourself? And being known before you're needed is a way to show that you care about the community and the charity work that you do. Those are all important things. And I think we've gotten into a world now, everyone's so focused on that bottom of the funnel activity that they forget, without that stuff at the top of funnel, all you're doing is commoditizing, because now price is the sensitivity.
Exactly. When I got into the business initially, again, I wasn't a contractor. And when I started realizing what goes on in the contracting world, early on, our first slogan was a service company with integrity and a contractor who cares. Because it was pretty obvious in the early days that if you had a conversation with somebody about their experience with a contractor, caring and integrity were probably not part of that conversation. So we wanted to build that in right out of the gate. And then we had this really great jingle, known best for being better, and that was a big one for us. I mean, I'd be out
simple, repetitive.
Simple, repetitive.
They try to do too much in jingles. Have you ever heard that jingle that goes on for like 67 seconds, or that billboard that has like 87 words when you're driving 90 miles an hour?
You'd be amazed. I run into people all the time that know our company, and they or their kids sing the jingle to me. It's a riot, but it's sticky, and people remember it. And again, that's the key to building longevity.
Yeah, and I love it. You've said so many things that are radio sensitive. And again, I think all these mediums are similar in their approach. Like I said, you can't have a long jingle. You can't have a long-winded billboard because nobody driving 90 is going to be able to read your entire billboard with your little print. And I think people get overzealous. They think, oh my God, my business is to the point where I have to market. Let's market. And they don't think about it. They just try to shove so much stuff on. Or they get a jingle that doesn't actually say what they do. And that's fine. But like you said, integrity is one of those sticky words, right? Everyone can say it, but how do you show you have integrity? Now all of a sudden you're on all these billboards. They hear you on sports teams and they hear you with all that stuff, which I think really helps. I think as marketing modernizes, what have you seen in the modernization? Obviously, we're not Yellow Pages anymore, but when digital started coming, how did you treat digital marketing?
Well, we knew that's where everything was going. So we put obviously a lot into pay-per-click and SEO and making sure our website was, coming up and constantly improving it.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, we were fortunate. We had a great advertising agency, which we're still using to this day. Who
they still beat us up on price.
Yeah.
Once a year, they give us a good beating. Don't worry about it.
That's good.
But they, when you talk about integrity, they carry themselves with integrity. And the reason I say that is because they interact with the salespeople. The salespeople around, they say the salespeople are saying this. A lot of agencies, they deal with the owners, but they don't deal with the salespeople. And ultimately, marketing is making leads for salespeople. Because if salespeople feel they have leads, they feel valued, respected, and like there's a future for them. So the salespeople are such a huge part of this. It's a shame that more people don't understand marketing and sales should be allies in everything they do. But to give your people credit, they do a great job and they work with salespeople, which is most agencies don't even bother.
Yeah, and that's important. So, do what you do best. There are so many business owners that are working in their business and not on their business. And then they become the bottleneck because the people they bring in, they want to grow with the company. But if the owner is so focused on working in the business instead of on it, then the business is not going to grow and his people aren't going to grow. So, people are always the greatest asset of a company, and probably the second most proudest thing that I would like to take credit for is the culture that we built that came with it. Because as you grow and scale, you need a team. And the company was way over my head a long time ago, no matter how good anybody thinks they are.
Yeah.
When you start scaling a business, you better put the right people in the right seat and take good care of them, or you're just going to be a very busy person with no life.
For sure.
And a business that's stagnant.
Yeah, and I think, I hate that everyone takes everything to a sports reference, but like sometimes it's just easier, right? The best players in the world very rarely make the best coaches. The best coaches in the world very rarely make the best owners because the mindset is so different. Like you said, being in it, focusing on it, and focusing above it down, and bottom up or top down. And I think, when we get back from the break, just in our conversation, and I've known you for a while, but the self-awareness is that you have a pretty fond sense of your own self-awareness and know where your limits are. And I think that probably has helped a lot of business because it keeps some of the ego out of the way. Like, hey, okay, let's stop here because this is not how it's going to work. Let's take a step back and let's take a look. So when we get back, we're going to play advice you'd give your younger self. And we're going to play what advice would you give to people that are starting to get into this field right now. So you've been listening to the Marketing MadMen on Extra 106.3, and we will be right back. Welcome back to the Marketing MadMen on Extra 106.3. Nick Constantino here with Tom DiGregorio, founder of Aquaguard. And Tom, based on this conversation and things I've known about you, I think one of the things that's clear is that you have a pretty good sense of self-awareness. And the reason I say this is because everyone wants to be a business owner, and business owners are a rare breed. The times I've had a conversation with somebody like, don't you know who you're talking to? And I'm like, a guy who runs a $10 million business that nobody's ever heard of? Who do you think you're talking to? You need that ego and you need a certain sense of, being a leader to run a business. But a lot of times I think that gets in the way. So what would you say, what you built a successful business, you're modest about it. What were you think were some of the traits in yourself that you found out that helped you build the business?
Well, to kind of go back what I said just a little while ago, when you recognize that you want to scale, then you got to realize you can't do it all yourself.
Yeah. And
you have to bring in good people, and your people are your biggest asset. So the owners, a lot of owners, they just end up, they keep working in the business and they don't put the confidence and the trust or the training
There you go.
Finding the right people and training them properly. They get the plate spinning over here.
For sure.
And this one drops, and there's no system in place other than them, and that's a problem. And culture, I think, what's the old expression? Culture eats strategy for lunch. You can't underestimate that.
Yeah.
How you treat your people, what you say, what you don't say.
You could pivot. You could pivot a strategy. You can't pivot a culture. It takes years to change a culture.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Years.
So, I think that's a critical part of building a company that's going to sustain for the long haul. We have in the 30 years, we probably have 8 companies right now out in Atlanta that used to work for us, and they all think that they can do it on their own. And quite honestly, not a one of we still do 4 to 10 times more business than any one of them does.
Yeah, it's setting up that barriers to entry.
So and we focus on what we do. We had a big competitor in town. I won't bring their name up, but they were the only game in town back in the 70s and 80s and 90s, and they'll tell you, you're 75 years in business, blah blah blah, and their only focus was to bash Aquaguard.
Yeah, it never works.
And people, it just completely, and they're a shadow of them.
And it never works. And one of the reasons I think it doesn't work is you're bashing the industry to an extent also, right? Like, I am a rising tide lifts all ships, right? First of all, radio's dying anyway, so I shouldn't be bashing anybody if we want anything to succeed. But at the same time, you look petty, right? It looks like you only manifest your insecurities by talking things about somebody else. It's just it's with people, it's with businesses, it's with anything. So that's a bad strategy. What about you're younger, you're 1996 Tom. What advice would you go back in time and give yourself?
Well, probably from the very beginning, I was looking for great people. But probably this is a good way to go. If you want to build an A team, and an A team is what really gets you to where you want to go. And what happens is a lot of business owners, they have B and C players, and they may work with them, they may not, to see if they can become B and A players, but they don't. So they basically have a company that's filled with, maybe a few A players, a lot of B and C players, and you can't grow, you can't thrive, you can't scale under those circumstances. And some of the biggest mistakes business owners make is they hold on to the wrong people for too long. Now, don't get me wrong, a B and C player might be a great person.
Right.
But are they doing what you need them to do to maximize what their position is and to help the team grow overall? Right. And a lot of people companies won't do that. Back in our industry, if you had $1 million sales rep, that was golden. I can't tell you how many $1 million sales reps I've let go because they didn't fit into our culture. We put our company goals and values on the wall, and we hired, fired, and lived by. And it was very easy when you had to sit down with somebody who you had to let go or reprimand.
The rules were right there.
You show them right there. So do you understand what it is you did, how that doesn't match our values and our core values of the company? And the biggest mistake business owners make is that when there's indiscretions by their top people and they don't let them go or they don't reprimand them, and everybody else sees that. Yeah. And then they realize, well, if they're not going to get in trouble for doing it, then why should I even care? Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with a little bit of fear.
I mean, you've got to, but when you have the right culture, your people will call the bad ones out. Yeah. It isn't even management. Yeah. They'll come to you and say, listen, this guy is cutting corners out in the field, or this guy in sales is saying what the customer wants to hear and not what they need to hear. So when you build a good culture, it actually helps take care of itself.
Yeah, and I think if you have a lot of A players and Bs and Cs, it's much easier for the Bs to become As and the Cs to become Bs. Yeah. I think if you got a couple A players and a lot of Bs, it's much harder to see what the next level is. I'm going to keep going back to sports, whatever, but like Kirby's got 5-star recruits everywhere. So the 4 stars aspire because they want to be better than the 5 stars. Georgia Tech's going to have 1 5-star recruit. You built a team completely differently. You're building your games when the clutch moments matter. You have your A guys, right? No coach, no owner wants to send in the craziest moment the C guy, right? The C might handle itself, might surprise you, but in that moment, you want your A guy, right? You have a negotiation to get a university. Emory University needs waterproofing, right? You sending your C guy? Probably not. You want your A guy there. Yeah. So we got 2.5 minutes left. Talk about just a little bit advice to somebody trying to start a business in your field, any business. What advice would you give them to be able to set yourself up for future success?
Well, obviously you got to know what it is you're doing, technically, whatever that is. If you're into construction, you need to know what it is you're doing. And then you need to just continue to hire, train, motivate, and develop people. Hire, train, motivate, and develop. Repeat. Hire, train, motivate, and develop.
Talk about motivation a little, because I think motivation has gotten harder over time. I think you have a good time where money was a motivator. I think things have changed a little bit. This concept of purpose and mental well-being has kind of eased its way in. Talk about motivation and talk about some of the ways you use motivation.
Well, you're right. I mean, people might think that it's all about money, but you make good money in a bad culture and your company is not long for the world, and you're going to lose a lot of good people. So I mean, in our case, we certainly paid well. We incentivized them to do a great job, but we have, every year a great summer picnic, typically on the lake. We spend a lot of money on it, bring everybody and their families together. A good Christmas party. We did things at the office all the time.
Yeah.
And we made it more than just a job for them. And it sounds basic,
but a lot of people don't do it.
But
it's funny. How do you quantify a company picnic, right? How do you quantify these things? Well, put it this way: if you got 1% more out of every employee, it paid for itself 5 times over, right? And the camaraderie, and I think that's one of the things a lot of people miss, especially with those top-down owners, that it's all about them and they want to be in, is there's not camaraderie there. Feel you're working for somebody, not with somebody. And I think that's a big difference maker. Well, Tom, I genuinely appreciate it, brother. To everybody out there, if you have basement problems, the storm did any damage, get it taken care of quickly. Call Aquaguard. They will take care of you. You've been listening to the Marketing Madmen on Extra 106.3, and we will catch you next week.